Well, good morning and welcome. I have a really special person I want to talk to you about today. And unfortunately, I've gotten I was doing so much reading, and so I had a hard time just kind of encapsulating it into a shorter story. But this woman is someone we all owe a tremendous debt in our spiritual journey. I'm excited to tell you about her today. This is Clara May Rowland, and she's always called just May Rowland. She was born in 1890, which I think is interesting and significant because 1890 was the year that Silent Unity was also born. And she passed away in, 1977. Now, her early years, she was born and raised near Kansas City, and her parents found unity when she was about 5 years old. So let's say 1895, unity was still very young. It was happening in the home of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. So her parents from the very beginning, and of course her life from the very beginning, were always centered around unity. Not much is really known about her family, but in one excerpt that I read, it said something about she had a sister. I don't know if she had other siblings or just the two of them. But what I do know is that her parents were significant, even though they are behind the scenes and we don't know much about them, in the development of early unity. Her father, David Hoagland, taught unity classes for over 20 years. He was chairman of the board in the early days. And also, we owe a great debt of gratitude to David Hoagland, because in 1905, unity was growing like a house of fire, but it was in a house, and that was becoming increasingly difficult. They needed to have a place, a head office, if you will. In 1905, David Hoagland mortgaged his home to give the Fillmores the down payment on what would become 913 Tracy Avenue. Now, you have to think about 1905, very few people had a mortgage, let alone to take out what we would call today a second. That's much more common in the way we pay for homes and mortgages today, but certainly not in 1905. So it was a tremendous leap of faith on the part of the Hoagland family. But by 1915, the debt had been totally repaid. Her work began in the early years. Unity was growing quickly. And by that, I mean, it started out in the home of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and they had this little printing business on the side for a magazine they called Modern Thought. Well, it wasn't very long before more and more people came, more and more people were being healed by their prayers and by their healing services, if you will. And so slowly but surely, they were just literally growing out of space. When we come into the early 1900s, both Charles and Myrtle Fillmore are in their 60s, and the operation of the organization was just getting too difficult to manage. So as we saw a couple months back before the holidays, we talked about their eldest son, Lowell Fillmore. And Lowell took over from his father the organization of Unity School, the literal physical day-to-day activity of the organization. The counterpart to that was May Rowland. On June 12, 1916, shortly after she graduated from high school, she married another Unity worker by the name of Frank Whitney. On December of 1916, same year, May was given the title of Director of Silent Unity. She was 19 years old. And I think about that and I think, what trust Myrtle Fillmore had. Silent Unity was Myrtle Fillmore's baby, and she wasn't going to just give it off to anyone. And here, a 19-year-old girl is going to become in charge of this wing, if you will, of the unity work and the unity movement. Now, Frank B. Whitney was a very interesting character. Myrtle Fillmore called him Sonny Jim. She loved him, thought he was the greatest thing happening. He, at that time, was the director of the School for Correspondence. Remember, there was no online classes at that time, and they would type out classes and send to them. You would send and say, I'd like to be part of the correspondence school, and that's how you would be involved in unity. Frank Whitney is someone you also should remember because it was he who developed the idea of the daily word. Being the director of the School of Correspondence, one day, so the story goes, he was on the trolley coming to work at downtown Unity, and he thought to himself, if people could just have something to read, they can put in their purse, they can put in their pocket, something small that would give them an affirmation of truth, would reinforce what they were learning through the correspondence school. And in July of 1924, the first Daily Word publication came about. Now, Silent Unity, okay, remember they're married, Frank Whitney and May Rowland. Silent Unity is growing during this time because it's flourishing under May's leadership. Both she and Frank were passionate about affirmative prayer and affirmations. And they saw the Daily Word as sort of the publication arm of what was going on in Silent Unity. So in the front cover of the Daily Word would be the affirmations for the month. They're still there. If you have a Daily Word, go home and look at it after the service and see that there are affirmations. Some of them are prosperity, some of them are for healing, some of them are for peace, some of them are for a blessing. Each month, there are affirmations in that front flap of your Daily Word, and it's continued to this day. This is a picture of the Silent Unity workroom, circa 1920s. I want you to notice that the men are all suit and ties, and the women are all in dresses and heels, and how orderly their desks are. Doesn't look a thing like mine. And of course, typewriters everywhere, typewriters. May, being very young, she's 20 years old and suddenly was in charge of 30, almost 40 people, getting these prayer letters every day. It was pretty overwhelming to her. And so she would run to Mr. Fillmore, to Charles Fillmore, and say, I don't know what to do about this situation. What should I do about this? Finally, after about the third or fourth time, Charles Fillmore said to her, rather curtly, the Christ mind is in you, use it. And in her memoir, she said, I got the hint. He didn't want me coming back asking him what I was supposed to do. The Christ mind is in me, and I need to use it. What May did and what her real gift was, is she had an organizational mind, just like Lowell Fillmore, her counterpart in the Unity School. Together they were a formidable force of bringing order and organization to both Silent Unity and Unity School. And remember, in this time and era, there were many, many new thought movements that were springing up, but many of them we don't know whatever happened to them because they did not have an organizational structure. And remember, these were times before the phone, or they had a phone, but they got very few calls because it was very expensive, and there were no computers. I know. Before computers, who knew? The 1920s were a time of change. In the early 1920s, the Fillmores bought what was known as Unity Farm, and now we know it as Unity Village. They had a master plan that in 5 years' time, they would build on the property and move everybody from downtown Kansas City, which, the area around 9th and Tracy was beginning to change over the years. It wasn't as upscale as it used to be. And so in 5 years' time, they were going to move everyone out to the Unity Farm. The first building that they built was the Unity Tower. And in case you didn't know it, the Unity Tower that you see on all the Unity publications is actually the water supply for the main campus. The second building that was built was the Silent Unity Building. And in the summer of 1929, May Rowland packed up all those typewriters, all those desks, all those chairs, all those people, and moved from downtown Kansas City out 20, 30 miles to Unity Farm. However, 1929 wasn't the best of years, shall we say. It was the COVID of its day. The stock market crash in October of 1929 sent the entire world into a depression. And Unity struggled with being able to continue their building program and their concept of moving everyone out. So what in the end happened was the Silent Unity workers were out at the farm and the rest of Unity was downtown. And it just became so difficult for everybody. And finally, they decided we need to move Silent Unity, typewriters, desks, people, carts, everything back downtown into the cramped space at 917 Tracy. And we would not move again until everyone could move at one time. They said it was so difficult having the two component pieces. And I said, no, we'll not do that. Now, in the meantime, in 1931, Myrtle Fillmore dies. Charles Fillmore dies in 1948. So Charles did see from 46, 47, 48, they were moving out of the downtown area and moving out into the farm that later became incorporated to Unity Village. Everyone was going to move together. Ultimately, there was a new Silent Unity building that was built, and it was completed in 1988. 1 year before the dedication of the 100th anniversary of Unity. Now, this is the building that they moved into in 1929. On the main floor where the arches are is what we call the Fillmore Chapel. Behind those arches is the Fillmore Chapel, if you've never been there before. And the Fillmore Chapel is the only place where Charles and Myrtle Fillmore together held services. Remember, she died not too long after all this happened. When you look at the upstairs of this building and you see the three windows, that's where the Silent Unity workers worked. And that was the light that shines for you, because all night long that there would be a light in that central window that said that we were praying for you. And of course, this is the cupola of the new Silent Unity building that was built dedicated in 1988. And again, that light radiates 24/7, and it is the light that shines for you. That is their logo. Now, the daily routine, when May took over, she ran Silent Unity for 55 years. In 1916, there was 100,000 letters per year. By 1971, 750,000 letters. In 1916, a few phone calls. But by 1971, 200,000 phone calls per year. Now, of course, we know that number is minuscule compared to what it is today as it ramps up into the million. In 1916, 35 people were on staff. By the time she retired, 140 people were on staff. And here's where I think May Rowland took Myrtle's vision of continual prayer and made it a workable, tangible thing. Every morning at 8 a.m., even today, the Silent Unity workers begin with song and prayer. For many years, the song we just sang, Healed by the Power Divine, number 135 in your hymnal, that is a song I encourage you to memorize. Take it out for a while. It's a great walking song. Heal, heal, healed. It's the affirmation of truth that you want to get it into your core. And that was what those songs were all about. That's why they sang them. They were sort of like a chant. We sang it 3 times, and that's what they would do. You notice that the words too were written by Charles Fillmore himself. So they would go to work, everybody sitting down at their typewriters, starting to answer letters. By 10 a.m., they had a small break where they would read the daily word and a moment of prayer as they recite the affirmations that were in the daily word for that month. At 11 a.m., all the workers stopped for silence. And if you were ever there, and I don't know that they still do it, but when I was in school, that at 11 a.m., everything stopped. They would ring the chime and they would play a recorded message of Charles Fillmore reading the Lord's Prayer. I don't know. It was a terrible recording, so you weren't really sure at first what you were listening to, but finally someone would tell you, oh, that's Charles Fillmore reading the daily word, reading the Lord's Prayer. But the entire village stopped. Everybody, I don't care what you were working at, where you were at. And there was a lunch break. At 2:30, they had a time of instruction and again, prayer. The idea of the instructions were, how do we answer these things? What are the affirmations that we use? How do we support and help people in their journey of whatever they've requested? Because it was the full range of course, the human condition. At 4:30, they closed the day, blessing the letters as they sent them out into the mail, and with a prayer blessing all the workers for the work they had done during the day. Her life was really her work. Like the Fillmores before her, anonymity was an important part of the work. Silent Unity workers were one. That you never got a letter from Silent Unity that said, "Dear Marianne, we're praying for you. Love, Tom, Silent Unity worker." It was always your friends at Unity or Silent Unity, whatever it might be, because there was the passionate belief. And one of the things that Myrtle's vision that she saw in May Rowland was that May understood that if you're coming to Unity Village to work on your own spiritual journey, you don't belong in Silent Unity. The people that are in Silent Unity are the ones who are able to pray with and for others. The workers had to be proficient typists. I mean, that sounds kind of funny, but think about it. Part of their day was prayer, but the other part was literally physically working at a typewriter to type 100,000 letters. All had to be answered, and they had to be answered in a fairly short turnaround because people have written to you and you needed to get an answer back out to them. After toward the end of her tenure in the 1970s, actually earlier than that, after the Second World War, she began to travel internationally and to promote unity. Many people said that after the death of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, it was May who became the spiritual leader of the organization. And the more I read and have understood about her role and Lowell Fillmore's role, I would say that they put the practical feet on Unity's theological Christian tradition. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore had vision, and we need vision too, but somebody's got to put that practical footwork underneath it. And certainly that's what I would say Lowell and May did that work. As I said a little bit ago, affirmative prayer was for May the way you prayed. You did not beg God. You did not plead to a remote God. You affirm the truth within. It was God who did the healing, not the Silent Unity workers, which again was why they were never named. This was interesting. She said that faith was the bridge across the inharmonious appearances of limitation to the place in consciousness where we know that we are a child of God, free, whole, and perfect. She believed in the legacy of continuous prayer, which we practice in silent unity to this day, 133 years. Now, what happens here? Remember, I showed you the picture of the cupola. Right underneath that is the prayer room. And what happens is, on a rotational basis, the workers who are on the phone and the workers who are still answering letters on the computer and through the mail, on a rotational basis, 2 or 3 workers will go into the silent unity prayer chapel, which you cannot go to. The one downstairs you can go to, but you can't go to the one upstairs. It is very, very restricted and ritual. There will be a chime. And when that chime sounds once, you know that it's your turn to get up from your chair. The second chime, you walk out the door in silence, and right outside the door are the 2 workers that are coming in to take your place. That's a profound statement that for 133 years, 24/7, that cycle has never been broken, partly thanks to the vision of Myrtle Fillmore and the footwork of May Rowland. During the Second World War, many people, of course, were calling, asking for prayers for their loved one. Did unity teach that we should go to war? And so in response to that, May asked one of her workers, James Dillard Freeman, to write a special prayer for the soldiers so that silent unity could send to the families. We know the prayer today as the prayer for protection, and we will say it at the end of our service in a few moments. Her legacy to unity. She wrote many unity articles and pamphlets, especially for the Daily Word. Frank Whitney died in 1938. She remarried years later. She never had children, but she loved to have a good time. She loved to dance every Friday night. I think there's something really great about that. She was a flaming redhead who liked to dance a Texas two-step every Friday night. That's my kind of woman, I tell you. On our website, unityofbrownsville.com, under the classes tab, this morning, I put some interviews by other ministers about May Rowland and also about the early years of silent unity, some of the film strip that we have. So after you go home today, check that out. And I hope you've tried the You Pray app on your phone through Google Play or the App Store. You can find, what is so interesting, May's vision of almost 100 years ago is that anytime, anywhere, anyone could pray, could pick up the app, connect with silent unity, and your prayer is being heard and recorded. What's also interesting about the You Pray app, if you haven't tried it, A, it's free, and B, there's a whole series of meditations on there. So if you're having a really hard day, go to the You Pray app and just click on one of the meditations to center yourself into the peaceful presence. And last but not least, I want to share with you her most famous story, and that is the story of May and the tornado. So let me stop sharing this. And in her own words, a lot of people, when they hear May Rowland, they say, is it true, that story about May and the tornado? And I happened to find it in her book, Dare to Believe. One spring, there was a tornado in the vicinity of Unity School and in the vicinity of my home. The radio reported the direction in which it was moving. Those of us at my home were in its direct path, and the tornado was headed our way at a speed of 50 miles an hour. Then the radio and the lights went off. We continued to pray and also to watch out the window, like we do in the Midwest, to see where we could see the tornado. In another few minutes, the formidable black monster with a fire seeming to come out of it because of the glare of the red sky behind it and the flashing of the purple lights from the breaking of the power lines beneath it was practically upon us. In a great need and an urge of the moment, I said to this oncoming monster, dissolve in the name of Jesus Christ. it was not just that I spoke. It seemed that I was the very mouthpiece of God, speaking to this thunderous monster. And of course, not only was I praying, but everyone at Unity School was praying. The result of the experience was that though we could still feel the tremendous pull of the whirling wind of the tornado, it turned sharply and took another course. On its way, it continued to destroy, but in 10 minutes or less, when we went outdoors to see what had happened, there in the sky, what turned into a white, fluffy white funnel, still holding its shape, but with its power gone. Some years ago, I had a congregant, and he had gone to a class that May Rowland had given at Unity Village. And of course, the first thing everybody wanted to know about from May Rowland was that story true? And it happened somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s, because this book was published in 1961. And so she affirmed that not only did she see the tornado and blessed it, but that many of the Silent Unity workers also did too. But Jack said, I wasn't satisfied with that answer. I wanted to know what she said after the tornado went away. And he said she got a little twinkle in her eye, a little smile on her face. She said, you really want to know what I said? Jack says, I really want to know what you said. And she turned and she said, damn, this stuff works. So to me, that story, those two stories together, encapsulate the life of May Rowland. She was someone who was full of life. She didn't sit up in the Silent Unity Tower and pray all day. She had a passionate love for life. She enjoyed life. She traveled. She had heartache. She had troubling times. Yes, in fact, she did. So she understood clearly that when people came with a prayer request to Silent Unity, that she took that deeply into her heart and wanted to make sure that the Silent Unity workers did the same. She leaves us with a tremendous legacy that even today, Silent Unity, if there's any part of Unity that's thriving and surviving, it is Silent Unity that prays with an unbroken prayer. 133 years for our good. And I invite you, if you've never called Silent Unity, please do. Call them, get the YouPray app, check in with Silent Unity. The information is all on our website, and learn a little bit more about this tremendous power of prayer that we call Silent Unity. Thank you for being with me today.